Welcome to back to my channel, y'all. This is the closing arguments for Amber Heard's defense closing arguments. I didn't get to catch to be able to record the first part of their closing arguments, but this is one of her few attorneys. We're asking you to do that, to compensate her, to be fair and hold her responsible. This is on Court TV. We don't want another lawsuit. We don't want anything else. We want to leave Amber alone and let her get on with her life and raise her child. So let's talk about the counterclaim for a moment. These are I'm trying to so you can hear it. Mr. Depp say, well, why aren't you suing Mr. Waldman? Isn't that typical of Mr. Depp? He doesn't take responsibility for anything, so now he's going to blame his lawyer. But the evidence is very clear on all three statements, and we'll show them to you in a minute, that he says Adam Waldman, Mr. Depp's attorney, says these things. Now, Mr. Depp says, oh, I didn't even know about those until the counterclaim. Well, we know that's not true because Mr. Waldman's testimony was 2 months before those statements were made. In February of 2020, Mr. Depp accompanied Mr. Waldman to the Daily Mail, the same place that all three of these statements were published, and he gave him 2 spliced audio tapes to try to make it look like Amber was the person who was committing the abuse. He went with him. He knew that Mr. Waldman was doing this. He knew that Mr. Waldman was launching a campaign against Amber to try to discredit her. And the timing of this, we're talking, the statements now are April and June of 2020. The trial is July of 2020. So they're launching an attack to try to discredit Amber before the trial in the UK. That's what happened here. And that is Mr. Waldman, but it's Mr. Depp. The judge gave you 3 different instructions, and you'll all have them. He's acting as his attorney. He has the authority. So Mr. Depp is standing in the shoes of Mr. Waldman. Mr. Waldman is standing in the shoes of Mr. Depp. Michelle, can you please bring up the first statement? It says, Amber and her friends in the media use fake sexual violence allegations as both a sword and shield, depending on their needs. They have selected some of her sexual violence hoax facts as the sword, inflicting them on the public and Mr. Depp. Now, what this statement is meant to imply is that Amber is lying about the sexual assaults and using them with the media to try to discredit Mr. Depp. That's the clear implications of this. Now, the first part of this is this contradicts Mr. Depp's claims today that the first time you ever heard about the sexual assaults that happened was in this case. It was in the UK case. This is the case that Mr. Depp brought in the UK. And instead of Amber Heard trying to put this out in the media, she did exactly the opposite. Now, this article's not in your evidence book. At least some of you will remember it being shown at one point with the title that said that Amber was successful in being able to treat her allegations of sexual violence confidential in that proceeding. And it was treated confidential. She did exactly the opposite. She didn't want to tell people this. And you know that. You watched her on the stand. It was heart-rending for her to have to do this with the cameras, no less. But what else is false about this statement? It's that there was no false statements of sexual violence. Ben went through all 4 of them, and I will not repeat them all. You heard the testimony, and interestingly enough, you didn't hear any stories that differed from that with Mr. Depp. He didn't get on the stand and say, yeah, Ben, one of her defense attorneys already went in depth. I didn't catch the first part of his closing arguments, but I did catch the last part. Imagine painting those canvases and how long that took and how much hatred and rage you have to have for somebody to do something like that. Writing on the walls, tearing up her nightgown and wrapping pieces of raw steak and putting it all over the house. Remember that she also testified that he took her clothes and swiped them through all the paint before she left. You know these things happened. With respect to the malice on this one, you know he knows that he did these things. You know that he knows he was out of it for 3 days. And that's all that we need to prove for malice. But there's a couple of more facts here. But you can find whatever Mr. Waldman's done, and you can find whatever Mr. Depp has done. And both of those are the same for purposes of evaluating the verdict form. They stand in each other's shoes. When you have an agent, and that's what the jury instructions say, you can go with both. What did Mr. Waldman do? There was an article about the sexual violence that he had put from the April one that went into the trial. Amber's testimony, she was sitting near him in the trial. Adam Waldman threw that newspaper down in front of her defiantly. That's actual malice. And she was quite upset, and you've heard her testimony on the stand about that. He was just inflicting it on her. Remember Bruce Witkin's testimony? This was Johnny Depp's best friend for 40 years until he testified truthfully 4 years ago about the drugs and alcohol, and he stopped talking to him. There was a couple of really important things that Bruce Witkin said. One of the things is he said he met Adam Waldman once. Adam Waldman said, "Do you have any dirt on the Mandels?" And he said no, and that was it. And he didn't care. He is an attack dog. All he wants to do is attack and put dirt on people. The second thing that Witkin said that I think was pretty instructive was that Johnny Depp has deep-seated anger issues that have nothing to do with Amber. He remembered even back when Johnny was married to his sister-in-law, he had extreme jealousy even back then. And I think that's pretty significant. Remember, Mr. Witkin also was called in a few times to intercede in some of these fights between Johnny and Amber when Johnny would become so angry. The last thing I thought he said that was actually pretty important